A part of being human is recognizing the difference between us. Be it our skin color, our languages, our experiences, or even our hairstyles, all of us are different to some degree, whether by choice or by birth. But what if there were some out there who had differences so drastic it set them apart even from human society? Even if everything else about them was completely human aside from just a few single physical characteristics. Let's talk about it. This is Fantastical History. When discussing hybrid humans or demi-humans, as some call them, there are various questions that have to be answered first and foremost. First of all, what is a demi-human? Now, depending on the medium you choose to see, that answer can vary, but in the majority of cases, a demi-human is a human, but with physical characteristics similar to that of an animal, usually cats, dogs, mice, deer, and other mammals. They are distinctive from creatures like harpies, minotaurs, and centaurs, as those creatures have far more in common with the animal half than the demi-humans do. In fact, most demi-humans are only known to possess ears, tails, and sometimes horns, whiskers, or other small, insignificant aspects of the creature that they are similar to and nothing else. They are, in every respect, human, just with slightly different features. The most popular is what is referred to in the Japanese otaku circles as nekos. Neko is the Japanese word for cat, but it can also refer to a demi-human with the ears and tail of a feline. They are incredibly popular characters or demi-styles that have been seen in anime, art, and video games.
Mimi? Shippo?
私、エリスと言います。どうしました?
Now, the second question that must be asked, and this one is rather important, does their demi status grant them any special abilities? In the majority of cases that I have seen, not enough to be warranted any special treatment. For example, a dog demi-human might have an enhanced sense of smell or hearing, but that is usually the extent of it. It wouldn't make a drastic difference in the grand scheme of things, more comparing them to humans. In terms of physical strength, most won't be stronger than a normal human by a large margin, or at least not so much it couldn't be matched. But the final question, and probably the hardest question to answer, is, are demi-humans a race or just a genetic abnormality? This will be a very critical question in terms of societal treatment of demi-humans in history. If the demi-humans are a race, which is the typical way we try to look at different topics on fantastical history, then they will be more tribalistic, and will also be more likely to establish specific societies around their own kind. They would have interest in trade, economics, building of government, military, agricultural systems, all the typical aspects of growing and maintaining a normal civilization. Because they're a race or society, that would also mean that they are more humanoid than animalistic, and that means other cultures would see them in those terms. The Romans, the Chinese, and other great empires and civilizations would try to bring them into the fold of their empire. However, unlike previous discussions, it should be noted that the demi-humans are not unique in any physical or supernatural sense, and as such cannot be exploited like other races we've discussed could be. They aren't dangerous enough to be exterminated, but not useful enough to be exploited. Thus, they would simply be a workforce, another cog in the machine that is society. There would be discrimination, certainly, but not unlike that presented to people of every race of every society. Also, if they are a race, then that means that they would be localized, much like how those of African descent were predominantly from the African continent, or those of Asian descent are predominantly from Asia, and so on. Demi-humans are a big question mark in that regard, as they don't tie into any specific region. Given that in most drawn depictions of them, though, they are often very wide-eyed, fair-skinned, and with different hair colors. So we can likely assume that they would probably hail from Europe. If so, I believe it would be safe to assume that they would populate all around the Russian, French, German, Spanish, and British lands. This exposure to multiple languages, forms of government, and systems of commerce would be beneficial as the demi-humans try to establish their own cultural identity. Though, inevitably, their identity would begin to mesh with that of the country they made their home in. Now, a big consideration to be discussed, though, and this is one that I know people are going to bring up, is the question of slavery. Would demi-humans be enslaved much like the Jews in Egypt or the Africans during the Atlantic slave trade? Not necessarily. I mean, it could happen, but not necessarily. You got to understand, mass slavery is not a simple undertaking. The reason the African slave trade was so huge and booming was because of its convenience. Africa was already participating in its own slave trade amongst its own warring tribes and cities, and so when Europeans showed up wanting to purchase slaves, there were already willing sellers. Plus, Africans were immune to most of the diseases and ailments presented by Europeans. That's why Native Americans weren't as frequently used for slave labor, as they were more susceptible to dangerous diseases Europeans and Africans were immune to. Now, demi-humans, if they are, as I surmise, a mostly European race, would also be immune to these diseases, but I doubt they would be participating in a slave trade of their own. While it's certainly possible, and I have no doubt the Romans would easily make slave labor out of uncooperative demi-human communities and villages, I doubt that treatment would last long into the age of exploration. Remember, the initial reason for many people to go to the Americas was for the promise of an escape from religious and governmental persecution. If there was a great deal of persecution on the heads of demi-humans, I can guarantee they would want to flee to America as well. A good example I'd like to look at is the anime of Rising of the Shield Hero. In this anime, there's a race of demi-humans present, and in the kingdom of Melremark, the main area the story takes place in, demi-humans are treated lesser than humans and are greatly disliked by the king. In fact, we see that several demi-human villages are oppressed by elements of the royal army at times, and many are enslaved and abused horribly. One of the main characters, Raftalia, is a demi-human who went through such treatment. However, it should be noted that not everyone in the kingdom views demi-humans that way, and some local lords do protect them, despite being answerable to the crown of Melremark. Also, it is revealed that other kingdoms within the world besides Melremark are very demi-human dominant or favoring. I like this a lot because it demonstrates very well how demi-humans in the real medieval age would have been seen. While some kingdoms or countries like Spain or France, for example, might look poorly on demi-humans, perhaps Germany and Russia see them more favorably. And that would go a long way in determining how populous they are in certain countries, what languages and styles of speech they adopt, and what armies they fight for in the future wars. However, if the demi-human is the result of a genetic abnormality or mutation, then this creates totally different precedents. Firstly, it means that demi-humans would not be confined to just one part of the world, but could appear in every culture, in every race, and in every society. That means the cultures they appear in would react to them differently. Some cultures that venerate animals and humanoid animals, like the Egyptians, the Indians, and the Native Americans, would probably value them highly, putting them on higher tiers or echelons than the average human. But the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, and other Asian countries of the Southeast might see them as divine, or they would see them as abnormal, dirty, maybe unclean, different. It depends on how highly in the society they view animal humans. And in Europe, they would be seen as just another ethnicity or oddity. There would be discrimination in some areas, and there's no question that they would face some degree of antagonism, but not enough that would lead to genocidal removal. At worst, we might see some examples of enslavement, but otherwise likely just ostracized. In truth, demi-humans would likely be able to integrate into human society incredibly easily. If we flash forward years into the future, it's easy to see demi-humans interacting with and living among humans very easily. If they're mostly just humans with different traits, it's possible that they could even interbreed with humans and create more demi-humans or some kind of mix of in between. It's always possible, and I know that is a very interesting kind of reality to look at. Demi-humans are one of the few races that we've talked about in this series that I honestly almost felt like I shouldn't talk about, only because I see very little difference between them and an average human. But in any case, they are strange and different and seen quite often in fantasy media. As such, I felt it was necessary to at least give them their own moment in the spotlight. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.